This is an Eleanor commander review. Eleanor has finally arrived and we've got a new Cavalry Garrison commander. So in today's video we're going to be going over her skills, talent selection, formations, who you're going to want to pair her with, and where she's going to fit in this very tight Garrison meta. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk about the skills. Her first skill is a single target that reduces your skill damage taken by 10%. The damage factor is pretty solid at 2300, but it's nothing to write home about, and then the 3 seconds of 2% less skill damage is pretty good when you get 3 seconds of uptime, as long as you can keep the skills rolling. The issue with that is her talent selection itself is not very rage generating, so that's something that's a little concerning. In addition, since it's single target, it's not going to do a lot to deter people from swarming you. The second skill is a 20% attack boost, and then as a Garrison commander, the Garrison takes 15% less counterattack damage. This is pretty solid against Swarm, if you can get it to work that way. However, I would have loved to have seen the attack been health, or the 3% less counterattack damage that goes to 15% being 10% straight damage, to help keep her alive a little longer, because counterattack damage doesn't count on any of the skills, on any of the regular attacks, just the counterattacks. So in essence, you're only reducing 1/3 of the total attacks, which is kind of concerning, especially for only 15% reduction. The third skill is a 15% defense, which is pretty solid. And then if you're Garrison, whenever you're hit with a basic attack, you have a 10% chance to use the primary skill once every 10 seconds. This is going to be effective when you're being swarmed. I believe the way I was understanding is that it hits the primary target still. It doesn't use it on the commander that launched the basic attack. But either way, it's going to make it punishing for either the Garrison or the Swarmer to be able to hit the Garrison, because each basic attack, which includes attack and counterattack, has a chance to ping back for 2300 damage. It is unfortunate that it doesn't trigger a secondary commander, but there's probably very good reason for that with the crazy amount of commanders that can do crazy things alongside her if that were the case. The fourth skill is a 10% damage boost, and then when you're serving as a Garrison commander, after you use an active skill, which includes your primary and your secondary, 5 nearby allied friendly troops deal 5% increased damage, including yourself. And then for every allied troop nearby, you get an additional 5%. This means if you can get field control or field support, you can get a 10% damage bonus to your defense, which is super useful, on top of boosting 10% damage to 5 allies who may be attacking that garrison. So this is very much a counter swarm garrison in that regard, and it's very interesting to look at for that reason. However, they do have some concerns, generally speaking, about the fragility of this commander outside of that. But the raw damage output is also not cavalry specific, as are most of the stats you get for her as a commander. The raw damage and counterattack damage reductions are non-cavalry specific, which is useful. Lastly, the commander takes 5% less damage and deals 10% more skill damage to its current target, which means your single target's damages are going to do 10% more flat out, and then your AoEs are going to do 10% more to the primary target, and then less to any secondary targets hit by an AoE. This is very much a 1v1 style kit, and that's kind of the feeling I get from it. There's not a lot of survivability, not a lot of danger in terms of hitting multiple targets with AoEs, or hitting multiple targets with high normal damage. So it's going to do best 1v1 against a rally. It's going to do even better with field control. Although most garrisons will do well with field control, it feels like Eleanor definitely is going to need a lot more field control to be effective, or something that's going to limit the ability of enemies to flank your position. Next, let's talk talents. So Eleanor has a unique combination of talents with the Cav Garrison defense tree. So we're going to go to the nearest commander that can really make a good example and go from there. So for that, we're going to go to Jan. And really with Cavalry and Garrison, this is the setup you're going to want. You need the Emblazoned Shield, you need the Undying Fury, you need Impregnable, Impenetrable Fortifications, and Empty Fortress Stratagem. as they are all super necessary for garrisons and are must-haves. You pretty much should be carrying that everywhere. If you use those essentials, you're pretty much set. In addition, you could do something like 3% more damage to archer, 3 ranks into halberd, and then have less ranks to put into your blue tree because the defense tree is relatively weak. But you'll either have 32, or if you use the halberd skill, you'll go down to 29 to use in the defense tree for Eleanor. So next we're going to go to the standard defense tree setup, which I have here on Theodora. This is the standard defense tree, which takes 23 of the ranks. So depending on whether you chose the extra talent in the red tree for cavalry, you'll either have 6 or 9 ranks. And really, it'll come down to personal preference. If you have the 9 ranks, what I recommend is going 2 here, 3 here, and 3 here for a total of 8. And what that'll do is give you a 10% chance to reduce all incoming damage by 15% for a second, which isn't groundbreaking, but it is very, very solid. And then with the 9th talent point, you'll put it right here into all unit health, which is super, super, super solid as well. Alternatively, if you only have the 6 ranks, you could go into the health and then go to balance. You deal less damage, but you take less damage, and then you take 2 ranks in attack. Overall, I prefer the testudo formation down to 1 rank of health all units, and then the fewer ranks into halberd, because this damage reduction is pretty solid. But overall speaking, the defense tree is fairly weak, and you probably should avoid having her as primary as a result, because Jan's just a better option, and even the likes of some of the leadership commanders have better talent selection overall. So that's something to consider as well when you're deciding who's going to be your primary commander. Next, let's go to formations. Honestly, your formation is going to heavily depend on what your other pairing is going to specialize in. For example, if your other pairing half is a high damage commander, Wedge is going to be your go-to. If your secondary commander is a shielding commander, you'll want to use Hollow Square, or you'll want to use Testudo depending on your preference. And I went over that in a separate video, which is better for which situation. But overall, you want to suit whatever your secondary commander is. Due to the fact that Eleanor has a lot of stats that benefit the secondary commander as well as her own, and are not unit specific, you'll have a lot of variety whether you want to use Jan, or you want to use Hera, or you want to use Lapu. All of them will work at a different level of efficiency depending on what kind of situation, whether you want to have better 1v1, better damage output, better swarm resist, better tankiness, and really your formation will want to vary based on that as well. Wedge is probably going to be the most popular because Jan and Lapu will both best make use of Wedge, but Hera will probably use Hollow Square or Testudo depending on the situation. And you could even see the likes of potentially some other formations being used depending on what's released afterwards. But typically, like most garrisons, Wedge is going to typically be the best option, just because Wedge is generally the best option for most pairings, because more damage is usually a good thing. Next, let's get on to pairings. The most common you're probably going to see early on is Jan. Jan has 3 great talent trees, has great versatility, doesn't necessarily have to be cav only, but the more cavalry you have, the more beneficial it will be. But if somebody autofills with 10,000 infantry, it won't sink a defense like it would if you used her with Nevsky. You have good tankiness, good resistance to swarm, a little bit of AoE, and is generally a pretty solid option for the cavalry heavy player. If you're looking for raw damage, Nevsky's a good option. You do get stuck with Eleanor as a primary because you need the garrison tree, but the damage output with his primary being such a high damage factor, and then the 25% damage boost that goes to additional 35% for 4 seconds out of every 5 is really, really good, and it's something that has to be respected 1v1. And if you can control the field, this is a dangerous pairing that can really only be knocked out by heavy infantry. Alternatively, if you're looking for something that's a little more flexible and forgiving, Hera is a good option because his shield and then the massive normal damage reduction helps keep her alive longer and helps resist swarm, while his AoE does do a nice amount of damage when you tack on the fact that it does that extra 10% and you're hitting more targets on top of taking less normal damage. The 30% health is great. You get the 30% counterattack. you get a lot more to resist Swarm that helps benefit her and bring her up to a new level of Swarm resistance. And last, but certainly not least, Lapu is another excellent option, although he's more like Hera, except for not having as much survivability. So if you take Hera's flexibility and you dial up the damage higher and the survivability lower, that's essentially what you're getting with Lapu. Higher damage output, less survivable to Swarm, but you're more likely to beat an enemy 1v1 if you have allies in the field, and this pairing is definitely one where you need to either limit the enemy's ability to get in the area, or you need to completely limit their ability to attack by swarming or by gaining field presence in general. Because if you lose the field, you lose Eleanor's bonus on her ability, on top of taking a lot of swarm damage that you are not geared up to take. Lastly, let's talk about where Eleanor will fit in the meta. Overall, with her high single target damage, low general tankiness stats, but stats that are very useful when it comes to a fight against a rally, Eleanor is going to be best suited in a 1v1 style situation versus being swarmed. So she will do best in situations where your team controls the field, or the number of enemies that can attack your garrison are limited. Typically that is going to be where passes are going to be very relevant, and where most people get the idea that she is a pass commander, because the limited number of attackers helps keep her relevant and keep her in the optimal range of being able to fight effectively versus an anti-swarm commander. However, she will also see some use in forts or in flags where you can control the field, because the more you control the field, due to her ability, the better she's going to fight. Because she's not only going to boost her own damage, but anybody else who's helping you fight around the defense. So she's not going to be a be-all, end-all for all situations, but she's going to have a very solid niche in areas where the defense has a little bit of an advantage. So in choke points, in large structures like forts, and in passes where you can limit the number of attackers, are going to be where you see her most. However, you will see some other uses. City defense is possible just due to the sheer number of troops you'll have, and the fact that she doesn't need cavalry exclusively to be effective. But overall, she's not going to break the meta in any way, but she's definitely going to be an improvement in terms of options, and she's going to be a more 1v1 strong version of Jan, so to speak. Where Jan is great against Swarm and good at being versatile, Eleanor will be more specialized to 1v1 damage. But with that, we will wrap up our discussion on Eleanor. I do think she's going to be solid. She might not be a must-have like she may have been anticipated when we saw Lapu, but she's definitely going to have a solidified niche when it comes to 1v1, and she may break even further in as more pairings are discovered that suit her well. But let me know in the comments, do you plan on building her? Do you think she's going to change the meta in any significant way? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see me cover another subject as well, letting me know in the comments or joining the Discord using the link in the description is a good way to do that, because oftentimes those suggestions become future video topics. But as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.